Hey there Altenew friends, it's me for another Perfect Pairings with Jaycee, where I will pair the new Build-A-Flower Begonia with an old favorite of mine. The inspiration for this pairing came from a daydream of Chinese porcelain and two-tone flower petals. I also wanted to show you all two ways to fake no outline coloring by adding in your own pencil details. No outline images give the illusion that you free-handed the image yourself without the help of a beautifully illustrated stamp. And so you'll see that this bouquet contains no black inks. Before I continue, make sure you subscribe and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your Altenew friends. This pairing features the Build-A-Flower subscription service, which gives you access to monthly layering flower releases at a discounted price and guarantees your spot for their future releases. The Build-A-Flower Begonia and this old favorite of mine called Dahlia Blossoms from Altenew are two floral stamp sets that I feel illustrate no black outline coloring and will help my Chinese porcelain and duotone petals come to life. So grab your favorite Altenew crisp dye inks and colored pencils and let's get started. First, I'm going to layer and stamp the flower images from both Build-A-Flower Begonia and Dahlia Blossoms, but there is going to be a slight twist in how I ink these flowers. I'm starting with the outline layer and rose quartz from the Rose Petal family of inks, and I'll stamp that as you normally would. Then I'll align the solid base layer on my outline image and grab Sunray ink from the Golden Sunset family, as well as this foam ink blending tool. I'm going to apply a slight amount of ink to the center of this solid stamp and diffuse the ink by dabbing the stamp with my ink blending sponge to give me a halo of yellow ink and also decrease the intensity of the color. Alternatively, if you don't have a blending sponge, you can fully ink the image, stamp the image on a scrap piece of paper, and then stamp the second generation ink onto your outline flower to help take the intensity away from the ink. I'll do the same inking and dabbing and stamping for the most detail layer in Sunray. You may need to repeat the dabbing and inking on the detail layer to get a saturation you can see, but one that does not fully color the paper. All I am looking for is an indication of a shadow on this flower. So you'll see my end result does not have a lot of contrast, and that's exactly what I'm looking for, and you'll see why that's important in a few moments. But for now, I'll use the same technique for the begonia leaves. I'm using the Sweet Dreams family of inks and stamping the outline and solid image in dewdrops, and diffuse the most detailed layer with Aqualicious and a foam ink blending tool. Don't forget you can use second generation stamping as well to achieve the same outcome. Now for Dahlia Blossom, guess what? It's the same thing for the most part. The outline image is stamped in rose quartz, followed by the detail layer stamped in diffused rose quartz. But then the most solid layer is stamped in diffused sunray. This combination will help give me a very intense sunset gradient once the card project is done. I didn't show the leaf stamping for the Dahlia Blossoms because it is identical to the begonia leaves. Okay, so that's the first phase of this card project done. We won't use our crisp dye inks anymore for this project, so let's make room for some colored pencils. I'm using the colored pencils to help the illusion of freehand illustration and no outline coloring by adding in your own shadow details as well as other flower details. This is going to seem counterintuitive, but to help with no outline coloring, I'm going to add in a dark outline. The color choice I made is based off a begonia I saw online, but also I am looking for a warm red that mimics the warm orange yellow to create a sunset type duotone petal. The key is to apply light washes of colored pencil and to not immediately go so intensely right away. I am diffusing a magenta outline to a warm red to a yellow-orange pencil for that two-tone petal look. And by not stamping in a black outline, it looks like you drew this flower yourself. It's okay if the saturation throughout these red-tipped petals varies, that's how they appear in nature anyway. However, if you feel like you've lost definition between petals, take your darkest shade that you used while coloring and define the boundary of a petal by applying the slightest outline. Now here's where the slight shadow layer that we stamped earlier will help to indicate where we should add contrast. I know one of the questions I get when I do these coloring videos is where to put shadow or how I know about light source. And the thing is, I really don't. This is one of the ways I taught myself where to put shadows by sort of back calculating. It's like knowing the answer to the math problem, starting with the question, and working your way towards the answer. So I'm applying a slightly darker orangey yellow to areas where I see the shadow stamped layer from earlier and diffusing the colored pencil. The solid base layer we stamped earlier with Sunray helps take a lot of the base coloring for us. So simply put, what we are doing with the colored pencil is intensifying the contrast and adding shadows. So then I'm going to bring back the Dahlia blossom flowers. Earlier I mentioned 2 ways of faking no outline coloring, and I'll use Dahlia blossoms to do the second version. Instead of creating colored outlines for two-tone petals, we'll add colored shadows instead. I'm still working with the same sunset type color palette, but this time my head will make an appearance during most of the coloring. I'm applying the colors much like I would if I was using Altenew artist markers. I'm starting with the darkest shade and diffusing the color towards the tip of the petal. Then I'll blend that dark magenta out with a fuchsia, and then finally diffuse into the orange yellow and let that solid base layer we stamped earlier take care of the rest of the petal. Like the begonia flower, I'm using the stamped shadow layer to help tell me where I should apply colored pencil. Since the dahlia has many more petals than the begonia, I will need a sharpened pencil to help indicate boundaries between petals and give definition without the use of black outline ink. If this concept is new to you, one of the best things you can do is practice. Remember, these are light washes of pigment. Go slow and there is no need to rush through the coloring. Also, you don't need an expensive set of pencils, but I do recommend you go for quality rather than quantity. Or if you're much steadier than I am, you can use your Altenew artist markers like many of my favorite Altenew friends do. Okay, so here's the end result of the 2 flowers. The begonia has the dipped petals and the dahlia has the gradient shadows. I did the exact same thing with the leaves. Instead of going with a sunset palette, I went more monochrome with my pencils. I used the shadow layers again to indicate where I should apply my darkest pencil, and then diffuse the pigment towards the stamped base layer. I prefer to fussy cut these images instead of using the coordinating dies. The wonderful thing about fussy cutting is that you can modify the flower to give you size variation. So I created a smaller flower by cutting out the center petals of the begonia. I love modifying Altenew flower sets, especially ones that come with only 1 flower, like the begonia, to give me more arrangement variation. I will arrange the flowers and a few of the leaves on my card front. I'm looking for an overall isosceles triangular shape to the arrangement as usual. Pre-planning arrangements will also help me with the sentiment placement. I just hold up the stamp packaging to see where I want my sentiment to go. But before finalizing the sentiment, I'll add gold splatters using the 14 metallic watercolor pan set from Altenew. I'll use the enchanted gold and a fine-tipped water brush to add fine splatters all over the background. While that's drying, I'll heat emboss the sentiment using platinum crisp embossing powder. You can probably use the antique gold embossing powder since it'll match better, but I don't have it yet. I fussy cut the U portion of the sentiment and created a sentiment banner for the just for portion. Then I simply glued down the flower arrangement with begonia and dahlia, foam mounted the smaller flower for some height, then added the sentiment to an area that won't cover the flowers I worked hard to color. The final touch is a few sequins that coordinate with the fine gold splatter. And that's how I paired Build a Flower Begonia and Dahlia Blossoms for a modern, no black outline floral card. Perfect for someone you love. Make sure you share your Altenew Perfect Pairings ideas with me in the comments below. And hey, while you're there, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on endless inspiration and video tutorials from the lovely team at Altenew. Links to all the Altenew products, including the Build a Flower subscription, can be found in the description box as well. Thank you all so much for tuning into this Perfect Pairings with Jaycee, and I'll see you all in the next one.